our function as a bass player is they build from us, and we just have to be spot on. Learn the difference between practice and playing, because I used to play 12 hours a day when I first started. A lot of it was just repetition, and it really wasn't practice. Find the joy in what you do. If you love it, or you can find joy in it, you will excel in it.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to be bringing you today's episode featuring Tom Mendel. And Tom is currently playing Hamilton in Chicago, and he's played on over 100 other productions in Chicago and New York, and for national touring productions like Wicked, Billy Elliot, Book of Mormon, The Lion King, the list goes on and on. Tom also served as president of the Musicians Theater Association on the national level, and then as a leader in that world at the local level too. So 15 total years in those roles. We talk about that. We also dig deep into the gear that Tom is using on Hamilton. We go through every piece of gear. It is a fantastic bass gear geek out. And he's using most of what Richard Hammond, who's the bassist for Hamilton in New York, what he's using. So that's a great segment of the podcast. Advice for Tom's younger self, advice for getting into the business, and how the business looks at present here in 2017. Great conversation. And before we get rolling with Tom, I'd like to thank D'Addario Strings and let you know about our Kaplan Strings giveaway. If you haven't entered, folks, go to contrabassconversations.com/strings. You'll win a chance to get a set of Kaplan Strings. We're giving away 10 sets of Kaplan Strings to podcast listeners. I've got it on my bass. They work great for pizzicato. They work great under the bow. They sound magnificent in the bass section. As a solo player, they work incredibly well. I'm digging them. You should check them out. I'd also like to thank the Violin Shop, which offers professional setups, repairs, and restorations at reasonable prices. And they go beyond their customers' expectations. You get meticulously set up basses, you get friendly and helpful staff, and you get highly skilled luthiers. And they are working with one goal in mind, and that's making their customers happy with whatever bass they happen to be playing. So whether it's an open seam or a top-off restoration, the Violin Shop is there to help you through that process. They specialize in resetting necks, repairing cracks, installing new fingerboards, new bass bars, and custom C extensions. So whatever your playing needs, the Violin Shop will work hard to get the most out of your instrument without blowing your budget. You can check them out online at bassviolinshop.com. All right, we jump in here with Tom, and Tom and I are just starting to talk about his work with the AFM, with the Musicians Theater Association. Talk about being of service to the greater music community, like the kind of job you did with that. That's a pretty involved job. It must be nice you just finished up too as president for the Theater Association, didn't you? Like last year, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I was president for the Theater Musicians Association for 5 years. I ended last August. And I was president here of this chapter, the Chicago chapter, for I'll say 6.5. I did 6 years, and then one of the presidents needed to quit because he was so busy, and then I took over. But I did it for 15 years altogether, so it's kind of nice to be a bass player now.
I'll bet it's probably like a lot of found time all of a sudden.
But it really is. But I really believe in it. I think that I think whenever you have, I've been blessed. I mean, I really have I've never worked any other job except as a bass player. So I feel like you got to give back when So that was one of my ways of giving back, or trying to.
Yeah, and I think people who haven't done a job like that, they might have a vague idea of the amount of time that goes into something like that, or just the complexities and frustrations. And I've never done anything like that for the union, but I did in some other roles in different, like I was president of Illinois ASTA and things like that, and at the ISB I was on the board. And man, it's a lot of time you put into a job like that. You help a lot of people, but it's a significant time and emotional investment.
No, it really is. And when I took over, I just thought we really needed to get into the 21st century. There were some weeks I was putting in 40 to 60 hour weeks, in addition to playing. It was crazy, but it got done when I got manageable. It averaged maybe 10 to 20 hours a week. It's still a lot of work.
That's still a lot of work. Like what, and I remember reading, because you would have columns in International Musician, right? I remember reading articles that you wrote or posts somewhere. Was that in IM that you were appearing?
Yeah, quite a few things. The IM, the way it works, as you know, there's 5-player conferences in the union, and they cover specific areas of the union. So, there's ICSOM for the big orchestras, and ROPA for regional orchestras, and OXOM for Canadian orchestras, and then there's RMA for the recording musicians, and then there's a TMA for theater musicians. So the way the IM works is they would try to rotate articles so that we would be in maybe two or three times a year to do an article. And I thought that was great. It was something that Ray Hare started doing. And I just thought, it's really showing that the union cares and they're caring about the membership. And it was good. It was really good. It was challenging to write those articles.
Yeah, those things sneak up. I remember writing these Ask the Presidential columns, and I like to write, but man, it was hard to think of what to do or what to. But it's cool. I was in Elgin for years and years, so ROPA, played in Milwaukee Ballet, and that, and it was always really interesting for me to read things from the perspective of the other, what's going on in the world of theater, and I've just barely dipped my toe in that, subbed for a couple shows here and there. But it might be kind of, and there's so much we can talk about. I want to talk about Hamilton and all that kind of stuff, but could maybe so you were involved for all those years with MTA. What were some of the big gains because I know a lot changed, and like you said, moving people into the 21st century. What were some of the bigger milestones while you were involved?
I want to preface it by saying that I had an amazing executive board. Nobody can do it by yourself. And when you think about that, the TMA, we started an electronic newsletter. That started. We changed our bylaws. We updated them. We gained 4 new chapters around the United States. While we did it, we increased. We doubled membership. We have more money in the coffers for conferences and stuff like that. I would say one of my proudest accomplishments was that TMA is the theater musicians are the representatives at the Pamphlet B agreement, which is for touring musicians. And in the years past, the producers asked to have tiered agreements, so when they played in smaller towns that they could afford to have musicians to be out there. And TMA was always against that. But in 2005, the AFM passed it. But we were kind of lied to. We were told that they were going to try to get non-union work and get people into the fold. But what it actually did was it just lowered the salaries for musicians, because full pamphlet B, let's say, I don't know what it was back then, but it was probably around $1,200. It got lowered to the lowest tier was making about $700 at the end. So people were making much less money and doing harder work. So one of our best accomplishments was at Pamphlet B. Ray allowed me to speak, and I spoke from the heart and kind of shamed the producers and told them about some stuff. And we were able to get rid of the tiers. So there's no more tiered work. There's an alternative touring agreement, which is a little less than the full Pamphlet B rate, but the alternative touring agreement also has some perks in it, which could enable it to enable folks, depending on how much they make, how much profit the producers make. It can enable the musicians to make even more than full Pamphlet B. So it was kind of a win-win situation. So we feel really proud about that. And we started a bunch of committees and really trying to focus on problems for musicians playing theater what their concerns were. And I feel pretty good. I felt like we accomplished a lot, and I think that it's in a very good direction right now. One of the best things is there was when I took over, I just kind of had to make it up, and we changed bylaws, and we started committees, and we formed things. We started. If you go to our website, we have an officer's toolbox. I thought, man, well, how are officers going to know what to do? So we talked to our executive board, and we put in models for them to work on and stuff like that. So I could go on and on. We could do the whole thing on TV.
Well, but I find it interesting. I find it fascinating, just like, having worked in ROPA, being in the union since I, got out of college. And just so it's so great that, like what you're talking about, like with the toolbox, something like that, because, like if I look at Elgin as an example in ROPA, someone gets elected to the office and they're a trombonist. And this is their first time really doing anything besides like teaching trombone lessons or playing the trombone. So like, it's just so overwhelming to know where to start. And it must have been overwhelming for you to just like know like what tools or how to sort things out or create that. So just thank you on behalf of all the musicians that have benefited. Thank you for that work.
Thanks very much. But once I have to say, I had two amazing vice presidents, Michael Manley, who's now the director for touring and travel for the AFM, and Walter Uziatensky took over after that. And he just stopped being the chair of the Broadway committee in New York. Our board was so good, and we were just so open to making things good. We did it together. So I don't want to make it sound, I think I was a catalyst. If you go to afm-tma.org and just look at the website, I think it's pretty cool. We've done a lot.
Cool. And I'll make sure to link up to that so folks can check that out too. And I like to sort of hop around with these. I love to dig into, I don't know how many times I've listened to Hamilton, like driving around in the car the last, year or so, but a lot. So like Trevor Jones, mutual acquaintance of ours, he was wondering if I could ask you like what specific gear you're using on Hamilton. I think that'd be super interesting for all the bass geeks out here that listen to this.
Well, you know what? I in our email, you had told me about that. So I actually made a list, and I couldn't believe what I'm using it.
Nice.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll just talk about gear-wise. But I mean, I really want to go on about the band and about Alex Lacamoire and Colin Welford, our conductor, and just the whole experience. It's just amazing, and it's about as A-level as any show I've ever played, and I've been fortunate to play a lot, but this one was very A-level. So for it, when Alex asked me to do it a couple of years ago, I went down to New York and I watched Richard Hammond, who is the amazing bass player in New York, and watched him do it, and he was using a Bass Mods 5-string bass, and he had also a Lakeland hollow body 4-string, his own upright, and they have a Arturia Keylab keyboard, because we play keyboard bass on 5 tunes, the bass player does. I like the Bass Mods 5-string, but I'm a Lakeland endorser, and I have a Joe Osborne 5 that I think is pretty magical. I use it in the studio a lot, and I played it for Alex at the first rehearsal, and I bought a Bass Mods, but I never even played it. He said, no, it sounds great. So they were very open to let me do whatever I wanted to do. So my gear on it, I'm using an Osborne 5. I'm using, a Lakeland Osborne 5. I'm using a Lakeland hollow body 4-string with flat wounds, and that's to emulate the Hofner kind of sound, Beatles, Paul McCartney kind of thing for the King George tunes. And my acoustic bass, I have a Grodner model Pullman with a low C chromatic extension, and you need an extension on the show because you go down to a D for this particular show, and you use D's and E flats in the show. And like I said, I use an Arturia keyboard. We play. There's a big song called "My Shot," if you know that one. I play that, and "Wait for It," I play the keyboard bass for that. So anyway, for 5 tunes, I'm doing that. for the show, we have an Avalon U5 direct box for the electric bass, and an Opus 1000 direct box for the acoustic. I played a Sting show, The Last Ship, and the sound designer for that turned us on to that one. And the same sound people are doing this. The same sound guys are doing that, so they brought in the Opus 1000. It's an amazing DI for the acoustic bass. And we use the DPA microphones. Do you use those, Jason?
I'm familiar with them, but I do so little show playing myself that I don't. But I'm familiar with the mics.
Okay, I know, like at Grand Park Symphony, they use them for that and stuff like that. Yeah, they're great. So we use the DPA on it. I also, well, I'll just talk about the upright for a second. I also I use a visual sound volume pedal. Richard doesn't use a volume pedal in New York, but I sit on a stool, he doesn't. And I like having a volume pedal, and I also have an on-off switch, a mic on-off switch. So they blend my sound. So we go from when the volume pedal is off, all you get is the microphone, the DPA. And when it's on, it blends in my pickup, and I use a Wilson, if you're familiar with that. So there are 4 individual microphones drilled into the bridge. It sounds amazing. And let me think, what else am I using for this show? And it's kind of unique. It's the first time I've had a little pedal board for shows, for Wicked and for different shows. I've had Lion King. I would use chorus and octave divider and a tuner, and that I would have 3 pedals, and that would be it. For this show, it's very, very intricate, and it's mainly because of 2 tunes. But Richard Hammond designed most of this, the bass player in New York. He's just amazing, amazing design. But it was assembled by a guy named Tom Irwin in New York for Peregrine Effects. So when I got the show, Alex said, well, just do what you want to do. And I really liked Richard's, and I listened to it. There was a couple of things that I wanted to do differently, but Richard, I can't go on enough to saying just how great a guy he is and amazing bass player. But he turned me on to Tom, and we talked it through. So this one actually is a pretty involved a pedal board. It's pretty big. It's a Pedal Train Junior, if you know that size pedal board. But I have a Voodoo Lab switcher on it, and I use an Aguilar tone hammer. It's an acoustic bass preamp. It can be the DI. They take the Aguilar into the Opus 1000. Everything else on the board is for the electric bass. So Richard has 2 tuners on his bass. He has 2 Boss TU3s, one for the electric, one for the upright. I use a separate tuner for my upright. I use the Peterson Strobo Flip. It's just more accurate and faster. It's right on. I could go on about that. I will go on about that.
Yeah, go for it.
I've been fortunate to play a lot of recording in my career. In the studio, especially on the acoustic bass, and especially when you're playing in rhythm sections and when they're going to sweeten, you've got to be in with the keyboards. Whether it's an acoustic piano or it's an electric piano. So your intonation has to be there. So I'd have like these old Boss tuners or something. I have it on my stand. I always have a tuner just to check myself. But I use the Peterson so I can see it's some spot on, because, you have to blend as a section, but I think our function as a bass player is they build from us, and we just have to be spot on to do it. So it's really, over the years, it's really improved my intonation. I don't look at it very much, but when I look at it, I look at it to make sure, especially if I'm playing high. And it's a great reference tool. So I'll get back to the pedal board, but that's I would say for acoustic bass players, it's a great. I told a bunch of friends about it. Do you know about the Peterson app for the iPhone?
Yeah, in fact, I that's what I use to tune my bass.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Strobo Flip is the exact same thing, except it's a device, and you can see it in front of you. I told a lot of people about the iPhone app. And I see woodwind players use it all the time. As well. So anyway, the board basically, there's two tunes in the show. There's one called Blow Us All Away, and there's one called Washington on Your Side. And that's why this pedal board was built, was for those two tunes. Otherwise, you could have used a tuner and a couple of effects and that would have been it. But the way this board is designed is it has, I use a Boss chorus, the Boss CU3 chorus. I use an MXR octave, actually Richard and I both use MXR octave divider. There's two of them, one for Washington on Your Side for a setting for that, and one for a setting for Blow Us All Away. So those two are on there. And Richard came up with this full tone super trim. It's a tremolo pedal because Alex Lackamore said he wanted a Geddy Lee tremolo kind of thing. And Richard figured this out. It's amazing. So he has that on there, and he was trying to get a volume balance between the super trim and the chorus pedal that he used. They had different types of output. So this Tom Irwin, who at Paragon Effects, actually built a passive volume control. So that's on there. So you can dial in the balance between those two pedals. He also put in what's called a Layla, I forget how to pronounce, little Layla, true bypass loop switcher. And what it is if there's ever a problem with the board, you touch a switch and you get rid of all effects and you just go straight electric bass. And I actually had to use that for a show where the thing went out. So we just bypassed the effects. It was a brilliant design idea. And he came up with that.
It's a smart design idea. That experience would teach you like a safety switch to get out of if you need to.
Yeah. I never would have thought of that. I just give it up to Richard. It's a really, really great design. Anyway, it's a very cool board. All the pedals are put into the Voodoo Lab switcher. Okay, I mean there's a Voodoo Lab power supply too, but all the pedals are put into the switcher. So number one would affect the MXR doubler for Washington on Your Side. 2 would be the MXR doubler for Blow Us All Away. 3 would be the combination of the the full tone super trim and the chorus. And Tom, when I was talking to him, also made a mute switch for number 4. So it's only a 4-button switcher. So I have that there. And Richard we also have the the Radial Big Shot. It's because there's 2 electric basses. It allows 2 inputs, and input B you can dial in volume, so you match the volumes. Like my Joe Osborne, I put on B so that I actually take down the volume, so I match the volume with the hollow body, which is passive. There's no electronics in it, so it enables sound to have a matched sound, so they're not going between, having to do a lot of balancing. So I do that. I do all the balancing on the pedal board myself. So that's basically the pedal board.
What do you do in terms of strings, or I mean, whether for a Hamilton or just in general, like electric, and then what are you doing on the upright?
Well, years ago, I did a show called Pump Boys and Dynasts for a long time in Chicago, and I went to the NAMM show, which used to be in Chicago, and I got hooked up with GHS strings. And I've never changed. I've tried every string, but I use GHS Super Steels. I would say we used to do a lot of jingles in town, and Bob Lizick, I know, uses them. A lot of the first call session players in town use that. There's just terrific strings. So I use GHS Super Steels, so 45 to 105 for the 4, and I'm trying to remember, it's either a 128 or 135. I have to look at it. I can't remember which one I have on this one. I think it's a 135 for the low B. So GHS Super Steels, and I also use for the upright. I use Tomastic Spiral cores for the C and A string, and on my other bass I use for the E string, and I use Parastro flat chrome steels for the D and G. I really like the way that the pizzicato sound with those. Some of the more standard Parastro, it was a little thuddier, thumpier. It didn't kind of translate, especially in a big PA and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. That's cool to know about the string choices. Yeah, because I like Spyrocore, you'd expect, just in terms of the sustain and pitch sound, but that it's cool that the flat chrome steels work on the upper strings.
Yeah, I mean, you, as you told me, you're. I say you're a legit player because I'm a rock and roller, that tried to learn how to be legit, But when you're using the bow, I really believe that you should always emulate the sound that's the defining sound for the specific genre that you're playing. And I think the flat chrome steel sound pretty good orchestrally. Have you used those?
Yeah, I've used them for years, and I'm always experimenting. But yeah, those are excellent. Just really well balanced strings, great under the bow and pizzicato, and so yeah, I'm a fan. It's with this it's with the specificity of what you're doing, and then like running through amplification. It's fascinating to me, just like what works and what doesn't, versus like being in an orchestra section, kind of banging away back there.
It's really interesting, and I think also that it depends on your instrument, right? I've heard bass players that you play all sorts of different strings, and on their instrument it just sounds amazing. I've heard bass players that didn't like the Wilson pickup. There was other pickups they thought were better for their bass, but for mine, it sounds terrific.
Yeah. So is playing the keyboard bass, is that a common thing that you're asked to do? Have you done that before for shows?
Not for shows. Back in the 80s when Madonna and all those folks were out there, there were a lot of keyboard things out. So I did a couple of band things like that. And I actually played a few minor parts in the studio on a session once, but usually they would use a keyboard player for that. But no, this is the first show I've ever played keyboard bass. But fortunately, I play piano well enough, that I could do it.
Well, and just like sticking with Hamilton just for a bit, like you were talking about the band, like the first class experience of playing in that band. Can you just talk about like who's in the band and just what that's like playing in a group like that?
Well, it's a heavily vetted orchestra. It's one of the most, it and the Sting Last Ship are the two most vetted orchestras I've ever been in. And fortunately for me, Jim Wadlowski is the percussionist in the show. It was amazing. He's played drums on a lot of the big shows that I've, Wicked, Lion King, Billy Elliot, a lot of the big shows he's played. So he and I had done a show called Bring It On that Alex did. And we also did a show called Working. And so he was used to us. So he asked the two of us to play it. And the rest of the folks were auditioned for the show. And it's just amazing. I would start with Colin Welford is our conductor, and he's keyboard one player. He's just one of the most brilliant musicians I've ever worked with. He was our conductor on Wicked and Billy Elliot, and wise choice on Alex's part. Rick Snyder is the assistant conductor, keyboard two, and he quit Lion King. He was conducting Lion King for the past 8 or 9 years on the road. He quit that to come do the show. And he's from here. He was the first call keyboard player in town before he went out on the road touring with shows. He's just an amazing player. Tom Hipskin is playing drums. He's a phenomenal player, just a phenomenal drummer. Jim, I think, Jim Wadlowski was asked to play percussion, I think, probably because it may be the most hot seat in the orchestra, in that he not only plays acoustic and electronic percussion, but he also starts all the clicks for the show, which is really smart. He's a drummer, so it made sense, but it's a really big hot seat, I don't want to say because there's only 10 of us, so every musician, it's a hot seat for sure. Felton Offord is playing guitar, just amazing guitar player, funky guy. And then we have a string quartet with Chuck Bontrager as the concertmaster, Roberta Fryer was playing violin 2. Heather Bohm was playing violin 3 and viola, mainly viola. And Tahira Whittington is playing cello. And the string section were probably the most vetted of all, because the show is so rhythmic and it's so precise. So you have to have the complete orchestral thing together, but you also have to be able to play with a click track and make it swing and know how. And the way Alex writes parts, sometimes the cello is playing bass and sometimes the cello is playing internal parts. And that could be flipping around between the strings, who is the engine for the section at the time. So it was very involved, string section. I just feel really honored to be part of this orchestra. It's truly one of the best pits I've ever been in.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know Chuck and Heather and those string players that's one heck of a section there. Man, what a fun band to play in. I'd love to know, like, whether for Hamilton or Wicked or whatever, like, obviously you need to have people, available as subs. Like, if someone's going to come in and play, maybe what's the typical experience for a sub in terms of like coming and sitting in the pit and watching a performance, and then is it any different for Hamilton? This is based on the nature of the show.
Well, yeah, sub-wise, I only have one sub, and that's Chuck right now. That's Chuck Webb. If you know Chuck, he's a brilliant player. He's played with Aretha Franklin. He's played Motown, the show. I mean, he's very funky and really good acoustic bass player and just phenomenal. I'm kind of unique in that I don't sub out as much as a lot of folks, just because I get a lot of joy from it. It really reminds me a lot of being in the studio. So I really enjoy that. But as far as subbing the show, I remember you asked, there was one of the questions you asked in your email was if I had any tips for theater basses. I could give you that. I would say for this show, this is a through composed musical. We have an hour and 15 minutes straight, a 20-minute intermission, or 15 to 20 minutes, and then an hour 15 straight. And of that time, I might, as everybody knows, Alexander Hamilton was killed in the duel. So during the show, without giving it away, there's a soliloquy in there during the duel where it's only him talking. So I have about a minute and a half off then. Other than that, I have like 4 bars here, 8 bars there. I have maybe 3 minutes in the whole show off that I'm not playing. It's kind of like Les Mis or something like that, but this one is even more intense because it's so technically, the precision that's involved with it. So subbing this show, the bass book, and with any show, you really have to do your due diligence. But this one, we kind of kid about it. It's like playing 2 shows because there's an hour 15 of music in the first act, which is almost like what some shows are for both acts. As far as subbing, I think if I was going to give advice, I would say you got to be an extremely competent doubler, on electric and an acoustic bass. Many shows ask for fretless, many shows, Lion King, Rent, Billy Elliot. I could go Wicked. A lot of shows ask for fretless, so you have to be very competent on that. And if you haven't played fretless, start practicing it. I think I could go off in a big tangent as to philosophically and stuff like that. If I was going to talk about career advice and how to get in to sub and stuff like that, I would say it's really, really different from when I started playing shows. It's very unusual to get to sub a downtown show, a national touring show, or a national sit-down, as Hamilton is here, and never have subbed in a theater pit before. So my big advice is to try to get on a sub list at one of the off loop, not downtown theaters or in the suburbs. Like I was very fortunate. My very first show I was asked to play was the National Tour of Godspell. And when I first heard it, I said, "Are you effing kidding me?" I was doing pretty well. And then they told me what I was going to make, and I said, "I'll be there." So that was cool. And when the tour ended, the Marriott Lincolnshire actually bought the tour. So we played there for eight weeks. And then they ended up using me for 4 years there until I started doing then when I quit to do downtown work. But I really got to hone my skill playing off loop. And there's not as much at risk for a producer as there is downtown. A Hamilton ticket. I just found this out. I heard that people scalp tickets some people are paying $3,000 for a scalp ticket to see the show. I mean, it's absurd. I don't know what the face value in there, but that's absurd. But there's that kind of pressure. So when you get downtown, they expect it to be flawless. Is anybody flawless? I've never had a perfect show in my life because there's. You might have done a different volume or something, the articulation or something that wasn't perfect. But I've gotten all the notes right. But do you know what I'm saying? If you're going to play downtown, they expect the notes right. They expect that's expected. And so if you're going to try to get in, do yourself a favor and try to get in an off-loop situation. But before you do that, I think even more important is what's available now as opposed to when I was younger in the 70s. There's so much available on YouTube and as far as recording, and it's so inexpensive. Sit at home and practice not only with a metronome, but record yourself. And you know when I'm talking about Pro Tools or those kind of recording device. There's some really GarageBand or whatever, but look at the files. Get a drum loop or something and play to it, and then record yourself, and then look and see how you're lining up with the drummer or with whatever instrument that is. And what I call with my students, I tell them, put yourself under the microscope. Do yourself a favor. Put yourself under a microscope before you ever get into a professional situation. So when you get there, it's going to be nerve-wracking. It's going to be a lot of stuff. But if you know how to groove already and all that's going to it'll be of a lot of value to you.
I like that the image of the microscope because and like you're saying, like the just the level of precision required for whether it's in the studio or for a downtown show, like with this strobe tuner. And I remember an experience of going into just a small recording studio in Chicago and recording. And I thought I laid down a pretty good line, and then I went and I looked at the Pro Tools and I could see like my beat was like just a little bit off here, a little bit off here, and they're like move, and that's a great tip. Just record yourself to a drum loop and look to see what's really happening in your playing.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I play in a band called Real Horns, and that's some of the first call horn players in town. Kerry Dedman is his band. But Jim Wodlowski plays drums in that. I remember we were at a rehearsal, and I nicknamed the band 130 because it seemed like every chart was 16th notes at 130 or faster. It was like all these dirty lip tunes and all this other weird stuff. And I remember we were running through this stuff, and I was talking, well, okay, we can rehearse it or something like. And Jim turned to me and he says, "Hey, man, at this point in our career, there is no rehearsal." It really struck me. That really made me think. I really thank him for that. It's like, and I think even if you're young, when you're going out there, if you think about that, anytime you are heard, it's not really a rehearsal. People are judging you. I think that's a really, really good piece of advice.
I think it's a great piece of advice, and it's never really too early to start that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about all those college rehearsals I burned in my younger days. But that's a great sentiment. I'd love to thank you so much for chat. This is awesome, and people are going to love this. And I really appreciate connecting with you. I can't believe I haven't done it. It took me like 350 podcast episodes to chat with you. And like you were saying, like the difference between when you were starting out and now, just like the way the business has changed and the studio work and how that's all shifted over the years is remarkable. I never have any traditional questions except one for these. And it usually goes something along the lines of, if you could go back to chat with 18-year-old, 20-year-old Tom, whatever, starting out in the business Tom, what advice might you give that younger self?
I'll answer that by starting. I started late. I started late. I went to a Catholic school in North Louisiana when I was growing up, and there was no music program. And but I had a brother that was a bass player, half brother that lived in Mississippi. And when I started playing bass, I just asked him about it, and he gave me two tips of advice. He had actually played with what's his name? Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head. B.J. Thomas in Jackson. And he said, one finger per fret, try to work one finger per fret, and remember less is more. And that was early on. That was really great advice for me. So I think if I was going to look back to what I'm doing, if I could have talked back then, it would be learn the difference between practice and playing. Because I used to play 12 hours a day when I first started. But I don't know how much of that was there was a lot of practice in that, but a lot of it was just repetition, and it really wasn't practice. And I wish I would have been able to know about putting myself more under the microscope back then. That would have been a good thing. But I think I would also say, and I was very lucky because I started out as a rock and roller, is find the joy in what you do. If you love it, or you can find joy in it, you will excel on it. I think. I see a lot of folks that I don't see the joy in their playing. They're really, really, really good musicians, but the ones that really translate to me, I always find joy in their playing. And I think that would be a good piece of advice: is try to find joy in your playing.
Tom, what a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for talking with me for the show. And folks, you can find out more about what Tom is up to at his website, tommendel.com. Thank you for following along. This is kind of a theater musician-oriented week here with Tom and then with Derek Jones for our last episode. I love doing sort of thematic weeks every now and again. If I have guests that are kind of working in a similar medium, I try to do that. Or if I'm pulling out some old content and highlighting, I try to do that as well. I hope you enjoy that. And if you do, or if you have anything else you'd like to share with me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com gets you to me. I read each and every email I receive. It's such a thrill for me to open up my email. I can't believe I'm saying that. It used to not be a thrill, but after I clear out my junk mail, I get these beautiful messages from people all around the world. And that's how I shape this show. That's how I decide who to talk to, what direction to go in, and I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this episode with Tom or anything we've done on the podcast, the best thing you can do to help the show grow, continue to reach more people, is to share this. Share this where you hang out online. It's probably Facebook if you're like most people, might be Twitter, might be Pinterest or Instagram or whatever. But wherever you hang out online, share this episode. You can click that share icon if you're listening on your phone. You can go to our website, contrabassconversations.com, pick any recent episode and share that out. That would be great. I really would appreciate that. And I appreciate you listening and following along so much. And that's going to do it for this week's podcast episodes. Hope you enjoyed them. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon as we dig into more life on the low end of the spectrum.